David did not reach the cave of Adullam because he had found a solution. He reached it because movement had stopped working, and every place he had trusted to give him a moment had shifted under pressure. Ramah had given him distance, Naioth had given him cover, Nob had given him provision, and Gath had forced him into survival, yet none of it lasted long enough to feel secure. The cave did not greet him with relief, and the stillness inside it did not quiet what he carried. The air was cool and heavy, and the silence did not feel empty but full of everything he had just lived through, pressing in on him without offering explanation. Every sound near the entrance could have been nothing or everything, and that uncertainty kept him alert even in a place meant to hide him. He had lived through too many sudden shifts to trust stillness too quickly, and his body had not forgotten how fast safety could disappear. What once looked like refuge had turned without warning, and what once felt stable had proven temporary. The cave did not promise safety in the way those places once had, and that difference mattered more than he expected. The man who had stood in open ground now sat hidden in stone and shadow, and the distance between those two moments was not small. He had been seen, trusted, and elevated, yet none of that followed him into this place, and nothing in the cave reflected what had been spoken over his life. There are seasons when what you know about your life does not match what you see, and that gap begins to press on you in ways you did not expect. David carried that tension into the cave, and it did not ease simply because he was no longer running. The silence forced him to sit with everything without interruption, and there were no voices explaining what had shifted or what would come next. There was no clear direction unfolding in front of him, and no signal that anything was about to change. Only time stretching in a way that made every thought louder. Then the stillness shifted, not because answers came, but because presence arrived. Footsteps moved toward the cave, and the space that had held only his thoughts began to hold something else. The change was subtle at first, but it was enough to alter the atmosphere inside the cave. His brothers arrived first, and his father's house came with them, and their presence changed the weight of everything. David was no longer alone in what he carried, and the danger that followed him had now reached the people closest to him. Their arrival did not remove pressure, and it did not make the situation easier to manage. It expanded the weight of it, because now what happened next would affect more than just him. The cave became a place where responsibility widened without warning. There is a different kind of awareness that comes when the people you care about step into the same uncertainty you are still trying to understand. It removes the option to think only about yourself and forces you to remain present in a way that feels heavier than before. The cave no longer held a single man in hiding. It held a family inside a situation that had not yet resolved itself, and that shift changed how every moment inside the cave would be experienced. Then others began to arrive, and what followed did not simplify anything. Men in distress came, and their presence brought visible strain into the cave. These were men who had been pressed by life long enough for it to show in how they moved, how they stood, and how they looked at what was around them. They did not come with ease, and they did not arrive with answers. They came because something in their lives had reached a point where staying where they were no longer made sense, and the cave became a place where that reality gathered. Men in debt followed, and they carried a different kind of weight into the space. Debt does not remain confined to numbers, because it settles into how a person thinks, how they respond, and how they see what is possible. These men did not move lightly, and their presence added another layer to what the cave now held. The space did not clear what they carried, and it did not reduce the pressure they brought with them. It held it, and in holding it, required something to steady it. Then came those who were discontented, and with them came unrest that did not hide itself easily. These were men whose souls had grown unsettled, whose patience had worn thin, and whose lives had reached a point where continuing as they were no longer felt possible. Now the cave held distress, debt, and discontent all at once, and nothing about that combination suggested ease or order. It was a gathering of unresolved lives, each one carrying something that did not settle on its own. Why would men like this gather to someone whose life was still unsettled, and what did they see that caused them to stay? They saw a man who had not broken, even though everything around him had shifted. He did not have visible control, and he did not have a clear path laid out in front of him, yet something in him remained steady. He was still present, still aware, and still able to stand in a space that carried pressure without being consumed by it. That kind of presence draws people, even when the conditions do not make sense. The number grew, and with it came a reality that could not be ignored. About 400 men gathered in that cave, each one carrying something unresolved, each one adding to the weight of the space. David did not receive a group that was ready to follow in a clean or orderly way. He received people who needed direction before they were stable enough to respond to it, and that kind of responsibility does not wait for comfort. Then the shift happened, and it did not come with announcement or preparation. He became captain over them. That moment did not arrive after the men were fixed, and it did not wait for the environment to change. It happened while everything was still raw, unsettled, and heavy, and that is what made it real. Leadership did not begin when conditions improved. It began when people started looking to him while he was still in the middle of his own process. Have you ever been in a place where others needed something from you while you were still trying to understand what was happening in your own life? David now carried more than his own uncertainty, and the weight of that reality did not lessen with time. 400 men meant 400 stories, 400 pressures, and 400 ways that instability could show up at any moment. The cave did not reduce what he carried. It multiplied it. This was not a place where he could withdraw into himself and wait for clarity to arrive. It required him to remain present, to respond, and to hold a line that others could begin to recognize, even if they could not yet follow it consistently. The cave became a place of formation, not because it was comfortable, but because it required something from him that other environments had not. It required consistency in the middle of instability, and steadiness in the presence of pressure. David had to lead men who did not trust easily, and he had to stand among people whose lives had taught them to expect disappointment. He had to remain steady while everything around him carried tension that could shift without warning. That kind of leadership is not built in public, and it does not begin with recognition. It is built in places where no one is watching, and where the only measure is whether you remain the same under pressure. What if the place you have been trying to leave is the place where something good in you is being formed? And what if leaving too soon would interrupt what is still taking shape? David did not leave the cave as the same man who entered it. He entered looking for cover, and he remained long enough for that place to begin shaping how he would carry others. The men who gathered were not interruptions, and they were not accidents. Their distress, their debt, and their discontent became part of the environment that formed the steadiness required for what was ahead. The cave did not announce what it was doing, and it did not present itself as a turning point. It simply held a man and the people who gathered to him, and in that holding, something began to take shape. You do not see a crown here, and you do not see a throne. You see pressure, responsibility, and the early formation of something that cannot be rushed or replaced. Adullam did not look like progress, but something began there that could not have started anywhere else. It began in the dark, without recognition, without clarity, and without ease. David hid in the cave. The broken found him there. And without announcement, without title, and without a visible shift, a leader was formed in the dark.